A buried box in the garden. What secrets does it keep hidden? Welcome to Fogged Clue. I'm your host, Merin. Share in the comments where you're watching from. Your words make this community feel alive. The mystery begins. It was still raining when Maigret left the Quai des Orfèvres that evening. The sort of thin, steady drizzle that did not soak through at once, but clung to one's hat brim and coat collar, leaving everything faintly chilled. He tugged his scarf higher, not with impatience, but with the habitual resignation of a man who had known too many such Paris nights. The Seine rolled dark and sluggish beside him, the lamps reflected as broken threads of yellow light on the surface. He should have gone straight home to Madame Maigret, who would by now be setting the table with quiet precision. But something in him resisted the warmth of dinner too soon. He paused instead at the corner café near Boulevard Saint-Germain, where the windows were fogged and the door exhaled the smell of tobacco and wet wool each time it opened. Inside, he sat by the wall, his pipe unlit in his fingers. He watched. The two clerks bent over their card game, the barmaid wiping the counter with more force than was needed, the man in the raincoat who sat without ordering, staring at his hands as though they were unfamiliar to him. It was ordinary, all of it, but Maigret felt that familiar tug in his chest. The sense that behind such everyday faces, something waited to be said or concealed. He let his pipe rest, content with silence. The telephone on the counter rang. The barmaid, glancing at him, everyone knew him, of course, even here, lifted the receiver and then looked toward his table. Commissaire Maigret, it is for you. He rose slowly, as though the call were inevitable. The voice at the other end belonged to Inspector Janvier, subdued, carrying the echo of rain on the line. There has been a discovery, Chief, in a garden in Montparnasse. A box buried under the lilac bushes. They say it contains, something that should not be there. Maigret said nothing at first, only listening, his pipe stem between his teeth, though unlit. He could picture it already, a small Paris garden, damp earth turned up by a spade, neighbors leaning from their windows, curious but wary. A box, the kind that might have held shoes once, or perhaps papers. The kind of box that, when hidden in the ground, carried not just objects, but secrets. He murmured that he would come, and hung up. Outside, the drizzle had thickened, and he pulled his coat tighter. He did not hurry. One did not rush toward such things. The box would still be there, waiting in the earth, and whoever had placed it there would, sooner or later, betray themselves. Not by what they said, but by what they could not help revealing. As Maigret hailed a taxi, he felt the first stirrings of curiosity. Not sharp, not urgent, but like a faint hum in the background. He had no idea yet what the box contained. But he was certain of this. It had been buried not to hide an object, but to hide a truth. And truths, he knew, were like the rain itself. They seeped through in time no matter how carefully one tried to keep them out. The taxi let him out in a narrow passage that smelled faintly of damp stone and boiled cabbage. The address Janvier had given belonged to one of those modest buildings near Montparnasse, with a recessed entry, a brass bell panel smudged by countless fingers, and a corridor that led all the way through to a rectangle of garden at the back. The concierge's lodge stood to the left of the hall, lit by a single lamp under a green shade. He could see the outline of a teapot on a hot plate, the lid clicking softly with steam, and beyond, the concierge herself, broad-shouldered in a dark cardigan, hands rubbed red from soap, peering out with a look that mixed curiosity and proprietorship. Janvier was waiting under the arch that opened onto the garden, his hat drooping with rain. "Chief," he said softly, as if the garden could overhear them. There. The garden was no more than a shared strip of earth, hemmed in by wooden palings and the blind backs of apartments. A few lilac bushes stood along the wall, branches trembling under raindrops. The soil was turned near the second bush, and in the shallow pit lay a box, its lid bound crossways with twine. Someone had thrown a piece of oilcloth over it, as though to make it seem less like a discovery and more like a parcel that had always been there, only unnoticed. The policeman guarding it had the self-conscious air of a man who knows he is being watched from many windows. They were being watched. There were shapes in the lit rectangles above, a woman in a dressing gown with curlers, a thin man in shirt sleeves with a cigarette burning too quickly. A child raised on tiptoe by unseen hands, who vanished as soon as Maigret lifted his head. From somewhere on the third floor came the hesitant tapping of a piano exercise, the notes uncertain, stopping and starting, as if the pupil's attention were elsewhere. Rain whispered on leaves, and the oilcloth shed beads that glittered under the yard lamp. It was the concierge's nephew, Janvier murmured, keeping his voice neutral. He came to turn the soil for tulips. The spade hit something. He called her, she sent her boy to the commissariat on the corner, and I was closest. They haven't opened it. I thought you'd prefer... He stopped. One learned not to finish such sentences. Maigret stepped closer, not touching anything. The twine was newer than the box. Clean fibers, no fray. The box itself had been wet at some time before today. The cardboard showed dark, irregular drink lines that had dried, then drank again. It had a smell he knew but did not name yet, kitchen grease, perhaps, or camphor. He noticed a smear of something on one corner, like wax rubbed thin. He squatted, not minding, the damp. The lilac bush nearby had soil caked at its base where someone had shaken the spade. A cigarette butt was half buried by a shoe heel. 2 different brands, he saw, if one counted the butt on the path. One with a cork tip flattened, the other paper only and bitten. The concierge had come out by then, buttoning her cardigan. "I told them you would come, Monsieur le Commissaire," she said with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose sense of order had been vindicated by the arrival of the proper authority. "I told them, let us not touch. Things in the ground. One must be careful." "What time?" "Just after 6. The boy, he's 13. He was bored. I said, go into the garden. Don't make crumbs on my floor." And then he called. He has a voice like a clarinet when he is afraid. You can hear it through the walls. Janvier nodded toward the windows. "We have names. Shall I?" "Not yet." Maigret straightened with a small groan. The damp had gone into his knees. He let his gaze move slowly across the windows. A figure withdrew, leaving a curtain to breathe in and out. On a ground-floor balcony, a pair of women's slippers had been placed neatly on the rail to dry, though this was not a drying evening. The slippers were pale, almost white. They would show mud easily. He looked at the balcony door. A line of condensation had formed along the lower pane, as though the room beyond were warm and someone had been standing too close for too long. A man with a narrow face and heavy eyebrows appeared in the doorway to the hall and hovered, as if the step itself were a frontier. "Monsieur le Commissaire," he said, head dipping. "Armand Léger, retired from the post. I have the corner room, 2nd floor. I see the garden often because my back is no longer a friend to stairs. Would you like me to tell you?" "Later," Maigret said, almost kindly. He noticed how Léger's fingers kept moving as if sorting letters that were not there. People in retirement often kept the gestures of their work the way widows kept a husband's hat. "Where is the nephew?" "In the lodge," the concierge said. "He is green. He thinks everything found in the earth must be bones. Send him out in a moment." Another neighbor had come, a woman with the pale, powdered look of someone who took care to be seen even when no one was looking. She had tied a scarf under her chin, though there was no wind in the courtyard. Her eyes kept going to the box and then away, like a hand that wants to touch but thinks better of it. "It is not from us," she said to no one in particular. "We do not use boxes. We live properly." "What is properly?" Maigret asked without turning his head. Not putting things in the ground like gypsies, she said, then flushed as if the word had escaped without permission. The boy came at last, shoulders high, a smear of soil on his sleeve as though he had tried to rub at his fear, and only spread it. I didn't do nothing, he said at once, which made Janvier smile faintly. I just wanted the earth to look nice. My aunt likes it nice. Maigret bent to him a little. You did well to call. Did you see anyone by the garden earlier? Since breakfast, say, he thought. Madame Darzac came to hang towels. She always hangs towels, even in rain. She says the air makes them white. Then the music lady, with the piano. She dropped her key and had to come down again because she can't play if the key is on the floor. The bookbinder, too, the one with the blue hands. He smokes in the door because Madame says no smoke in the hall. Blue hands. From the glue, my aunt says. On the balcony with the slippers, a shadow moved. The door opened, and a thin man in a vest stepped out to look, lighting a cigarette with cupped hands as if sheltering a secret. He drew in too fast, the tip flaring, and exhaled toward the ground. His shoes, Maigret noticed, were clean, the kind of shine one gets by patience rather than pride. Clean shoes in a wet yard. He tucked that away with the slippers and the wax smear. None of it meant anything yet, which did not prevent it from meaning something. Inspector Longnon arrived then, his coat already unlucky with the weather, his eyes finding first the most inconvenient details. So, he said bleakly, we have a garden that gives birth to boxes. Paris is improving its horticulture. He nodded with professional gloom toward the neighbors overhead. They will all say they saw nothing, heard nothing, and if they heard something, it was the cat. Let them keep their stories for now, Maigret said. He looked again at the twine, at the steady drip from the lilac leaves staining the oilcloth in round, dark coins. We'll take it inside. The lodge. The concierge clasped her hands, unsure whether to be flattered or worried by being chosen. The policeman lifted the box with Janvier. It had more weight than cardboard, and secrets alone should have. Something shifted with a muted knock against the side. Not metal, or not only. A dull sound, like wood inside wood. The twine creaked when tension moved across it. Someone above sucked in a breath. A giggle started in one window and died because laughter had no place here yet. They carried it under the arch. In the warm yellow of the lodge, the teapot clicked again, and the smell of tea and starch replaced the damp garden air. Maigret closed the door softly on the corridor where faces might gather. He stood a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at the box as if it were another person who had come here to make a statement. The nephew hovered by the stove. The concierge stood with her hands flat on the counter, bracing herself against both gravity and curiosity. Janvier waited for a word. Longnon had already assumed disappointment. Chief, Janvier asked. Not yet. Maigret reached for his pipe, weighed it, and let it be. His eyes went to the small things in the room, a calendar with a kitten for April, though April was long gone. A key rack with hooks labeled by hand in a neat slanted script. Cellar, attic, gate. A pair of garden clogs under the chair, dried mud flaking in pale crumbs onto the mat. On the mat lay a scrap of oilcloth, the same kind that covered the box, curled at the corner like a leaf. He knelt and touched it with one finger. It had the same faint smell. Kitchen fat, yes, and camphor, the way old clothes smell in a chest that is opened only on Sundays. From the corridor, a child's voice filtered in, brave because it did not yet understand. Is it the wedding box? It asked, and was shushed at once by a woman with the authority of a mother and the fear of someone who knows words can summon things. Maigret straightened. He listened to the silence after that, which was also a kind of testimony. He nodded once, almost to himself. We'll have everyone down, he said at last, quiet as rain on leaves. But first, Janvier, keep the door. No comings and goings. Madame, a knife for the twine. Slowly, concierge set down a kitchen knife whose handle had been worn smooth by years of peeling and string cutting. Maigret took it and tested the edge with his thumb, not for sharpness so much as for familiarity. He slid the blade under the twine and drew it toward him. The cord gave with a small sigh. No one spoke. Even the kettle, as if understanding, held back its simmer. He lifted the oilcloth. Drops clung to its folds. A thin, fatty sheen caught the light and released that smell again of cupboards and Sundays. Beneath it lay a layer of old newspaper, its ink gone to a pale grey fog. He could make out half a headline about a municipal vote and, in the corner, the weather for a week long finished. He folded the paper aside carefully, as one might fold a shirt that was not one's own. Inside the cardboard was a board cut to size, a piece of thin wood that explained the sound he had heard. A practical mind had wanted the box to keep its shape when buried. On the board sat a smaller box of wood, the kind that had once held cigars. The brand was flaked away, but the ghost of gold letters still clung to the varnish. There was a smear of red where sealing wax had caught a corner and then been rubbed with a thumb. He set the wooden box on the counter and listened to the room breathe. Janvier shifted to ease his shoulder against the door. Lognon looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man preparing himself not to be impressed. The concierge clasped and unclasped her hands, the skin of her knuckles polished by the motion. The lid of the little box stuck a moment, then came free with a small click that sounded louder than it was. Inside, things were arranged as if someone had rehearsed this moment of finding and had wanted it to say something, but only to someone who would know how to listen. A length of faded satin ribbon, ivory once, now the color of tea. A sprig of lilac pressed flat, brown at the veins but still holding the ghost of its shape. A simple ring in a scrap of tissue paper, a woman's ring, gold thinned by wear, with the initial A engraved in a hand that had taken care. A folded photograph, and an envelope sealed in red wax, the seal broken and then pressed together again clumsily so that the crack showed like a healed scar. Maigret did not reach for the envelope first. He lifted the photograph by its edges. It showed the very garden outside, though the lilac bushes were smaller and the rain was only imagined, a brightness on leaves that must have come from the sun. A girl stood by the second bush, her head turned half away as if shy of the camera. She wore a dress with a narrow belt and a cardigan buttoned poorly, one buttonhole missed. In the background, on a balcony that was now hung with the pale slippers, a man leaned on the rail, blurred, not looking at the girl but at the person who held the camera. The date, impressed with tiny serrations, barely legible, was 10 years ago. He turned the photograph over. Someone had written, in a cramped hand, "Pour que tu n'oublies pas," with no signature. He set it down where the concierge could see without touching. She bent forward, then drew back as if the sight burned. "I know that dress," she said slowly. "It was sold on the first floor to the music teacher when her sister married. She shortened it, but—" She looked at him, at once defensive and eager. "There are many dresses." Maigret did not answer. He slid a thumb under the flap of the envelope and eased it open, keeping the broken wax between finger and nail so it would not fall. A single sheet inside, folded twice. The paper was cheap, the kind used for shopping lists. It had taken ink badly, the letters bleeding at their edges. He read without moving his face. It was not long. 2 lines, the rest of the page left blank as if words had failed or been taken back. "Forgive me," it said. "If you come in silence. Wednesday, after Vespers." No name, no place. Only at the very bottom, where one might add nothing, the initial A, the same as on the ring. He put the paper back with the same care. He looked at the ring again. The groove of the letter had gathered a fine line of dust. It had been worn for years before it had been wrapped and placed here. He lifted the sprig of lilac and brought it near his nose by habit. There was no scent left, only the memory of one which, in some cases, was stronger. In the corridor, footsteps arranged themselves hesitantly, and then a voice. "You asked for us." It was the man with the clean shoes from the balcony. Up close, he had the grey, thin skin of a person who had taught his body to ask for little. He removed his cap and held it lightly by the brim, the gesture too practiced to be deferential. Behind him, the powdered woman hovered, the scarf under her chin damp now. The retired postman had found a chair for himself along the wall and sat with his knees together, hands flat as if pinning down envelopes. The boy, dismissed then drawn by his own curiosity, had returned to stand half-hidden, his eyes round. "Please," Maigret said, and the word made room for them rather than commanding. "Stay near the door. We will speak one by one. It is nothing, only to understand." "Understand what?" the powdered woman asked, too quickly. Her gaze skittered to the wooden box and away, and then returned as if out of disobedience to herself. "What can there be to understand about an old thing in the ground? People throw away things all the time. We cannot keep everything. The city would burst." "No," Maigret said, almost gently. "It does not burst. It swallows." The bookbinder came last, wiping his fingers on a handkerchief that remained blue no matter how he used it. He stopped when he saw the photograph and did not step closer. His eyes went from the picture to the window behind Maigret, as if measuring the distance between times. "Is it allowed to smoke?" He asked no one, and then remembered Janvier at the door and put the idea away with a small nod to himself. "We will begin simply," Maigret said. "Who planted the lilacs?" "Already there when I arrived," said the retired postman. 11 years. The gardener for the owner put them in and then died. They have had to manage by themselves since." The powdered woman cleared her throat. "We water them," she said. "Some of us." "On towels," the concierge murmured with a sharpness that surprised even her. "Even in the rain." The woman flushed. "It makes them white." The man with the clean shoes looked at the ring, not at the photograph. "That is a good ring," he said in a flat voice, as though he were remarking on the quality of a broom handle. "Not rich, but good. Not a trinket." "Would you know it?" Lognon asked, as if hoping for a vulgarity. The man shrugged one shoulder. "I know hands. How things sit in them. A good ring leaves a mark even when it's gone." Maigret filed the remark with the other small, unimportant truths that later made a larger one. "Madame Darzac," the woman with the scarf lifted her chin. "If you mean me," she said, "I hang towels because I like the smell. That is not a crime." "No." He showed her the photograph without handing it over. "Do you know this balcony?" She looked and found herself looking not at the balcony, but at the blurred man leaning on the rail behind it. Her cheeks paled beneath the powder, which did its best but could not hide surprise. It could be anyone." "It could," he agreed. He let the photograph fall back onto the counter as if nothing in it mattered yet. "Monsieur Léger, you have seen more than others, perhaps. You keep the hours of one who no longer has to keep hours. Do you remember a Wednesday with Vespers?" The retired postman smiled with only one side of his mouth, the way men do who have carried a bag in bad weather long enough to discover which muscles can be spared. "Every week has one," he said. "But there is a church on the next street. The bells try even when there is no one." He tapped his knee with 2 fingers. "Wednesday is when the piano lesson was moved, because the child's father worked late. The music woman went out with her hair not quite dry. She carried a small parcel once and came back without it." "Once?" Janvier asked. "Once that I noticed," he said, with no vanity. The music teacher, who had come quietly and taken a place near the stove, pressed her fingers together until the tips whitened. She was not young. Youth had gone from her face and left an attentiveness behind that was almost severe. "I do not like to be cold," she said simply, as if that explained all questions. "I dry my hair as I can." Maigret looked not at her hair but at her shoes. They were black, sensible. The edges of the soles were clean, scrubbed with something that had left a faint chalk line in the welt. He let his eyes return to the wooden box, to the ring, to the letter with its broken seal. He was in no hurry to make anyone say anything. It was enough that they were here, that the things were on the counter, that the rain was doing its whispering outside, and the kettle, its patient clicking within. "Forgive me," he read again inside his head. "If you come in silence. Wednesday after Vespers." He thought of the initial and of the same letter cut into gold. Initials belonged to more than one name. Armand, Alice, Albert, Aline. He heard, somewhere above, the piano begin again. The same exercise, the same hesitations. The notes stumbled and then found their way, and then stumbled again, as if something in the player could not keep from looking toward the window at the lilac bush and the turned earth beneath it. "We will talk," he said, almost to the room rather than to the people in it. "We will take our time." He lifted the ring from its tissue a finger's width and let it fall back, so that it made the smallest sound against the wood, a thin click like a pulse counted in a quiet ward. "There is no hurry. These things have waited long enough." The ring still rested on its tissue, the faintest indentation showing where it had pressed for years against a finger. Maigret let his gaze linger on it a moment longer before returning it gently to the box. Objects could be stubborn witnesses, carrying with them stories that people worked so hard to suppress. In this small wooden case, a life had been folded away, like the pressed lilac, and the letter meant never to be read again. He closed the lid halfway, leaving the photograph exposed, as though testing the effect it had on those around him. The room had grown heavy with silence. The neighbors, drawn by curiosity, stood close but avoided one another's eyes. Janvier remained at the door, his back against the frame, the rain dripping from his coat. Lognon tapped the end of his pencil against a scrap of paper, pretending he was already writing down the disappointment he expected. Maigret ignored them both. His eyes shifted to the powdered woman whose scarf had loosened slightly. Her chin quivered in a way the powder could not conceal. "You knew her," Maigret said quietly, not asking, but observing. The woman gave a brittle laugh. "In a house like this, we all know each other. There are no secrets. We hear the pipes, the quarrels, even the dreams if they're loud enough." "But some dreams," Maigret said, "are heavier than others." Her lips parted, then pressed together again. She looked at the photograph once more, then away, as if its edges might cut her. "It was years ago," she murmured. "Why bring it back?" "Because someone buried it," Maigret replied. "And burying is never the same as forgetting." The bookbinder shifted his weight uneasily, his blue-stained fingers tightening on the handkerchief. His eyes had not left the photograph since it had been placed on the counter. "That was spring," he said abruptly. "I remember the smell of the lilacs. They made the air too sweet for me, like cheap perfume. She, whoever she was, stood there too long. Posed." He swallowed, his Adam's apple jerking. "Posed for someone she trusted." "And who was that someone?" Lognon asked quickly, sensing the opening. The man shrugged, his eyes dull. "Not me. I do not take photographs. I mend spines. Paper speaks enough." The music teacher stirred at last. She had been silent for so long that her voice seemed to come from another room. "The dress was mine," she said. "My sister's once, but mine when she was finished with it. That was me, by the bush. The cardigan, the belt. It was me." She looked at the photograph as if willing it to transform into something else, some other scene. "But I did not ask to be kept in a box." The concierge crossed herself reflexively, muttering something under her breath about sacrilege. Janvier straightened slightly. Lognon made a note he would later have to scratch out. Maigret remained steady. "And the man on the balcony?" he asked. She pressed her lips together until they paled. "I do not remember," the powdered woman scoffed softly. "You remember well enough." "Enough," Maigret said without raising his voice. It was not command, but certainty. The remark settled like dust. He turned his pipe stem between his teeth. though he did not light it. He studied the woman at the stove, the faint tremor in her fingers, the way she folded her hands as though bracing herself against music only she could hear. "The letter," Maigret said after a pause. "Was it yours?" She closed her eyes, then opened them again. "I cannot say." "You cannot, or you will not." "I cannot." Her gaze met his at last, and he saw something, not defiance, but exhaustion. It was a long time ago. What remains of words after so many years? The neighbors shifted, whispering among themselves. The retired postman leaned forward in his chair. "The church bells still ring," he said, as if offering a correction. "And Wednesday still comes every week." The music teacher's eyes flickered toward him, then fell. She rubbed at her knuckles, bare now, but once pressed by a ring. Maigret said nothing further. He let the silence do its work. It filled the room slowly, drawing out breaths, tightening throats. The boy fidgeted and then was drawn away by his aunt, who muttered about children not belonging in grown-up matters. At last, Maigret stood, heavy but deliberate, and placed the photograph back inside the wooden box. He closed the lid with care, as if tucking someone into bed. He handed it to Janvier. "Keep it safe. No fingerprints, no tricks. It has waited too long to be spoiled now." They filed out of the lodge, some muttering, some silent. The rain greeted them again in the garden, more insistent now, dripping from the lilacs onto the disturbed earth. The pit where the box had been seemed oddly accusatory, like a mouth half opened but unwilling to speak. "L'Oignon," Maigret said. "You will take names, nothing more for tonight. Janvier, stay here until the morning. I want no one wandering about the garden again." "And you, Chief?" Janvier asked. Maigret drew his coat tighter. "I will go home. Madame will be waiting, and I need to think." L'Oignon snorted faintly, as if the idea of thought were indulgence. But Maigret ignored him. He walked slowly through the passage and out into the street. The city seemed smaller under the rain, the pavement shining, the shop shutters already closed for the night. He paused beneath a street lamp and filled his pipe, but again he did not light it. He thought of the photograph, of the girl who was no longer young, who had said she did not remember. He thought of the ring, cut with an A, and of the broken seal on the letter. These were not clues in the sense of crime novels, not fingerprints or revolvers. They were fragments of lives, pressed together in a box and hidden in the earth like roots no one wanted to see. He crossed a bridge, the Seine flowing dark beneath him, and let the drizzles soak his hat brim. Somewhere in Montparnasse, a piano stumbled through the same exercise, starting and stopping as if uncertain whether it should continue. He knew he would return tomorrow, not with warrants or with force, but with patience. Someone among them would falter. Someone already had. As he reached his apartment building, he could picture Madame Maigret at the table, a simple stew simmering, her calm presence ready to anchor him after the damp streets. He allowed himself a small sigh. The affair of the box had only just begun, and already it carried the weight of something old, something steeped in silence. The truth would not come in haste. It would come like rain through soil, seeping slowly until the earth could no longer hold it. And he, as always, would wait. The warmth of Madame Maigret's kitchen steadied him, as it always did. She said little when he came in, only looked at his damp coat and set a second plate of stew on the table. He ate slowly, spoonful by spoonful, listening as she spoke of a neighbor who had lost her cat, of the baker who was closing for a week to visit family. These small things, spoken in her calm voice, seemed more real than the box and its contents. Yet behind her words, he felt the tug of what lay waiting. When the plates were cleared and she had taken up her knitting, he sat by the window with his pipe at last lit, letting the smoke curl against the pane where the rain traced thin rivulets. He thought of the photograph, the awkward cardigan, the girl by the lilac bush. He thought of the letter, its plea for silence. And above all, the ring, its gold thinned by years of use. Objects spoke more directly than people, for people evaded, circled, defended. But objects, once made and given, carried loyalty long after voices fell silent. Somewhere in that building, someone had chosen to bury not simply a box, but the memory of themselves. The following morning, Maigret rose earlier than usual. He dressed with care, not because of ceremony, but because he felt the need for gravity. When he reached the Quai des Orfèvres, the clerks nodded in subdued greeting. News of strange finds spread quickly. In his office, he leafed through the reports Janvier had already sent during the night. The names of tenants were written neatly, their statements brief and cautious. The concierge had said again that the boy only dug by chance. The retired postman insisted he noticed little beyond his daily pains. The bookbinder spoke of lilacs, not of people. Madame Darzac, the powdered woman, claimed she knew nothing, and the music teacher, Madame Girard, her name, had admitted only that the dress was hers. None of them mentioned the ring or the letter. At mid-morning, he walked back through the drizzle to Montparnasse. The garden was deserted, the soil now covered by a sheet of tarpaulin weighted with stones. A blackbird picked at the edge, flapping away when it saw him. From the stairwell windows, curtains stirred faintly, but faces did not show themselves. He knocked at the concierge's lodge and was admitted. The boy sat glumly with a book of comic adventures, pretending to read but turning no pages. The concierge herself fussed with a broom, as if sweeping away the memory of last night. "They are restless," she said. "Since you left, no one has spoken properly. They pass in the hall and close their doors." "That is often the way," Maigret said. "Truth has a smell. It clings." He asked to see Madame Girard. The concierge pursed her lips, but sent the boy up with a message. Presently the music teacher came down, her hair pinned, more neatly this morning, her eyes shadowed by a night of little sleep. She greeted him without warmth, but not without dignity. "Madame Girard," he said, "walk with me." They stepped into the courtyard. The lilacs dripped onto the tarpaulin, each drop making a dull sound. She folded her arms tightly, not against cold, but as though to keep herself from unraveling. "You say the dress was yours," he began. "Yes. And the photograph?" "I told you. I did not ask to be kept there. Someone else took it. Someone else kept it. You were younger." Her lips tightened. 10 years younger. A foolish girl who let herself be seen. "And the ring?" At this, her breath caught. She did not answer at once. When she did, her voice was low. "It was given to me once, by a man who promised what he could not give. When the promises broke, I gave it back, or I thought I had. And the letter?" She closed her eyes. "I never wrote it. But I might have. Those words, I might have written them if I had dared. They sound like me, too much like me." The rain thickened, pattering on the tarpaulin. She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "Please, commissaire, there is nothing criminal here. Only what should have been forgotten." "Why disturb it?" "Because it was not forgotten," he said simply. "Someone wanted it buried, but someone else wanted it found. Your nephew did not dig by chance. Children are clever. They hear what is whispered. Perhaps he was sent. Perhaps he stumbled on what another could not bear to show." She turned her face away, gazing at the grey wall where ivy clung stubbornly. "If you keep pressing, you will only hurt people who have already suffered enough." "Sometimes suffering is the only language left," Maigret said. She gave a faint, weary smile, almost admiration mixed with resignation. "You will not stop." He shook his head. When she left him, climbing the stairs with slow steps, he stood alone by the lilacs. He lit his pipe, watching the smoke drift. From somewhere above, he felt eyes on him, though when he lifted his head, no curtain moved. The pit under the tarpaulin seemed to breathe faintly, as though the earth itself wanted to speak. Later, he sat in the cafe on the corner, his notebook closed before him, untouched. He drank a small beer, the glass sweating in his hand, and thought of what Madame Girard had not said. Not denial, but silence too careful. There was another name behind all this. The man blurred on the balcony in the photograph. He remained faceless, yet he was the key. Someone who had stood above, watching, part of it all, yet never speaking. When he returned to the quay, he asked Janvier for the parish records of the nearby church. Wednesdays, Vespers, the lists of those who came. It was a tedious request, the kind that clerks disliked. But Maigret knew the small, ordinary entries. Names signed in haste, or not at all, might tell more than direct questions. Evening came again. He walked once more through the drizzle toward home. The lamps shone in the wet streets, and the Seine breathed its damp air. He imagined the tenants behind their doors, whispering, listening for footsteps in the hall. The box had been lifted from the soil, but its shadow remained. Tomorrow he would return, patient as always. The walls of the building were already speaking, just not yet aloud. At the corner before his street, he paused, struck by a faint unease. A figure had been following at a distance, pausing when he paused, moving when he moved. When Maigret stopped beneath the lamplight, the figure turned away quickly into another street. He did not follow. There was no need. In time, they would come closer. In time, they would speak, even if only through silence. He pushed open the door to his apartment, and the smell of Madame's cooking reached him. He set his hat on the rack, the rain dripping softly from its brim. He thought of the ring, the letter, the blurred face on the balcony. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow something would give way. Morning brought a washed grey light and the smell of damp wool from the coat he had left to dry on the stand. Madame set a cup of coffee before him and, without asking, a small dish of prunes. He told her, in his unhurried way, about the box, the ribbon, the pressed lilac, the letter with its clumsy seal, and at the end, almost as an afterthought, the faint smell that clung to the oilcloth. Camphor, she said at once, knotting the thread on her knitting. For moths. People keep it with linen, wedding linen often, chests in attics, sometimes cellars if the roof leaks. She slid the needles through the wool and looked up. Mild, practical. Oilcloth catches kitchen fat. You store it in the same drawer as aprons and it comes away with their life. That and camphor, both together. Someone opened an old chest in a room with a stove, not only a garden. He carried that with him like the taste of the coffee as he crossed the river. At the Quai des Orfèvres, a messenger had left 2 envelopes on his desk. The first held a neat list from Janvier, names, apartments, the hours they claimed to have kept. The second was a note from the sacristan of Saint-Pierre de Montparnasse, written in a thin, careful hand that took pains not to blot. Wednesdays, it said, Vespers at 6. 10 years ago the hour was the same. There was a young woman who sat in the last pew by the pillar. She came often but did not take communion. She would leave by the side door if the rain was strong. Once she asked me to ring the bell longer. I remember because nobody asks that. Her name on the little list we keep for flowers was A. Girard. Flourish uncertain. Maigret stood a moment with the paper between finger and thumb, feeling the texture. He could hear in his head the hesitant notes from the building's piano, the way they faltered and began again. He put on his hat and went to the church. The nave was almost empty at that hour. A woman with a scarf knotted under her chin was lighting a candle as if to warm her hands. The sacristan, a narrow man with clean fingernails, met him by the font and repeated what he had written, with a few details that did not take ink well. How the young woman would turn half around at the consecration as if listening for footsteps. How she once came with a small parcel, wrapped in brown paper, and left without it. "Not a sin," the sacristan said defensively, as if sins might be counted like chairs. "A parcel is a parcel." Outside, the drizzle had resumed. He walked to the building in Montparnasse with no haste, and the concierge, seeing him through the green shade, put her broom aside without being asked. "They are quieter today, Monsieur le Commissaire," she said. "Quiet like soup left too long on a low flame." "The cellar," he said. She hesitated, then handed him the key from the neat rack, the one labeled in slanted hand. "Cellar. It smells," she warned. He preferred it that way. The stairs were stone, damp in the corners where moisture had taken root. The cellar cages, wire and wood, padlocked, each with a tin tag nailed to the beam, held the jumble of lives. A bicycle without a chain, a cradle with its paint scuffed by years of being tucked and untucked, stacked crates once used for fruit, now stacked for the idea of order. Camphor met him before he reached the last turn, a clean, bitter scent that cut through mold and coal dust. "This one belongs to 2 right," the concierge said, tapping one tag with her knuckle. "Madame Darzac." The padlock had been greased recently. It left a faint smear on his thumb. Inside, folded sheets were stacked in a trunk along one wall. He did not ask to open it. He let his eyes circle slowly. Along the floor, the dust had been disturbed in a small crescent near the post, as if something had been pushed across, then lifted. On the plank shelf opposite, a scrap of oilcloth had curled upon itself like a dry leaf. When he touched it, the nail of his index finger came away with a trace of wax that had gone cloudy with age and heat. "Who else keeps linen below?" he asked. 3 left, she said. "Monsieur Lenoir, the bookbinder. There with the blue hands. He takes work into the cellar sometimes because the glue offends his wife. 4 right is empty. 2 left. Madame Girard. She keeps nothing here. She says damp spoils music." He crouched, not minding his knee, and looked at the floorboards between 2 right and 3 left. A track, the kind made by something dragged very slowly, crossed the shared boundary and disappeared under the shelf. He put a palm to the shelf's edge. It had been wiped. Not clean, but recently enough that his skin picked up only a blur of dust. "May I?" he asked, though it was not precisely a question. The concierge lifted the hasp on 3 left. The smell here was sharper, glue and old paper. On the highest shelf, a stub of red sealing wax lay by a stack of newspapers as if it had wandered away from its proper drawer and grown tired. A blue handkerchief had pressed against it and taken a ghost of its color. He touched the wax. It was the same red, but in Paris, red wax was not rare. He noted the cigarette end in the corner, paper only, bitten flat. The pair to the cork-tipped one he had seen in the garden path. He closed both cages. "Do people borrow the garden clogs?" he asked, thinking of the pair under her chair last night. "They do," she said, affronted by the idea and resigned to it at once. "When it rains and they forget. Some return them. Some keep them until I knock." Who had them last, she thought, looking up and to the right the way people do when they are sorting days. The music teacher, last week, to shake a rug. Before that, the Darzac woman, for towels. The bookbinder, never. He says clogs spoil his arches. He did not smile. He thanked her and went up into the light. In the courtyard, the tarpaulin lay flat under its stones. On the balcony where the slippers had been left to dry, only the rail remained. The slippers had been brought in, or replaced with another pair just like them. A window opened above with the sound of someone who had not intended to open it and now didn't know what to do with the air. The man with the clean, patient shine to his shoes stepped out to smoke and found himself face to face with the sight of the commissaire far below, looking up. He turned his shoulder as if to shelter the ember from rain that did not reach him. "You walk early," Maigret said when they met by the stair door. It was not an accusation, only weather put into words. "I don't sleep," the man said, calm. "The pipes speak. They tell a man when the neighbors boil water and when they don't." He took a drag that made his cheek hollow. "I heard your steps in the night yesterday." "I was home," Maigret said. The man's mouth made half a smile. "Then the steps belonged to someone who wanted them to sound like yours." He looked past Maigret at the tarpaulin. "It will mold the earth if you leave it covered too long." "It has its uses," Maigret said. In the lodge, he asked Janvier to come down from his chair by the stove. "A favor," he said. "A thin line of chalk along the tarpaulin's edges, only enough that a hand brushing it would leave a thought behind. And the cellar, make a small mark on the grease of 2 Wright's lock, not to trap anyone, to know they came and went." Janvier nodded and went about it with the economy of a man who had learned that most traps spring themselves. The neighbors came and went like weather. The retired postman with a newspaper under his arm and no intention of reading it, the powdered woman with a clean dishcloth folded as sharply as an envelope, the boy who shuffled in slow circles until scolded into straightness. From above, the piano began, stopped, began again. At noon, Maigret sat on the garden bench under the lilac where the rain came through in large, patient drops. He did not summon anyone. He waited the way one waits for a kettle to boil, not by looking at it, but with the ears. When Madame Girard emerged at last, her hair neat, her coat fastened properly this time, she paused, saw him, and surrendered a small nod. She came to stand at the edge of the tarpaulin without looking down. "I went to the church," he said. "I know," she said, and a faint amusement touched one corner of her mouth. "The sacristan told me once that policemen pray less than others, but listen better. You asked for the bell to ring longer." "I was sentimental," she said, and it did not sound like an apology. "Sometimes you want a sound to go on after you leave, so that you can be sure you were there." He watched a drop gather at the cusp of a leaf, fatten and fall. "There is a chest somewhere with camphor in it," he said. "Wedding linen, perhaps. Someone opened it recently. The box in the ground carried its breath." She looked at him then, not evasive, simply tired. "This house has more chests than hearts, commissaire," she said. "People store what they cannot use. They keep, and when they cannot keep any more, they hide." "And you?" "I play scales," she said. "They keep the hands busy while the head is quiet." He nodded. He did not tell her about the chalk, about the lock with its small greasy mark. He did not tell her that someone had followed him last night and turned away only when the light found them. Instead, he let the silence gather again between them until she could take it with her up the stairs. In the lodge, the concierge had put on the kettle. "Tea?" she offered, hopeful of routine. "Later," he said. He looked at the door to the corridor, at the garden beyond, at the thin line of chalk that lay untroubled for now, like a breath held. "We'll let the afternoon do its work." He stayed, not as a watchman but as furniture. The day thickened and thinned, the rain tried and tired, and somewhere in the building a chair scraped back from a table the way a word pulls free from the throat. It would come. People always brought what they had tried to bury back into the light, if only because the darkness proved heavy to carry. The afternoon stretched, thin and grey, until even the kettle seemed to sigh more than boil. Maigret remained where he had planted himself, a presence as plain as a chair. Now and then the concierge peered through her green shade, reassured by the sight of him the way people are reassured by a clock that keeps time even if they do not look at it often. Janvier came in without fuss, his hat dark with the rain. "The chalk," he said softly, "is as you left it. The lock, 2 Right. Our little smear is no longer a clean line. Someone moved the hasp and wiped their finger, without thinking." "Just so," Maigret said. "We'll go down." The cellar air met them with its blend of damp stone and old coal, and Beneath, that thin, clean bitterness that camphor left like a word held on the tongue. At two right, the metal of the lock showed a new crescent where a thumb had turned it. The sheen was disturbed in a way one could only see if one had looked at it too closely before. The concierge stood with the key ready, aggrieved and loyal in the same breath. Inside, Madame Darzac's things were tidy in the way tidy things often are, by habit more than care. Along one wall, the trunk of linens sat with its lid dropped, but not pressed. Maigret lifted it. The smell of camphor rose like old respectability. The sheets were folded in squares with the edges aligned. Beneath the top layer, in the wood at the bottom of the trunk, a rectangle of untouched dust marked where something had lain flat for a long time and was gone. A pale thread of satin was caught on a tiny splinter at the corner, the color of tea now, not ivory. He touched it with a fingernail and let it go. "Madame," he said without turning, "you came down last night." The concierge flinched but said nothing. Madame Darzac herself had followed to the cellar door, scarf tight under her chin, though there was no draught. "I keep my own things," she replied, chin lifting. "Is that forbidden?" "What is forbidden is to bury other people's," Lognon muttered behind them, arriving late and already disagreeable. Maigret closed the trunk gently. "What lay here?" he asked, still not looking at her. She wavered, then set her jaw. "Old things," she said. "A box that did not belong to me. A ribbon, some papers, a ring once." She stopped on the word as if surprised to hear it spoken aloud, even by herself. "It was given to me to keep, years ago. A woman asked." She tried to arrange her mouth into indifference and did not quite manage it. "I did not bury anything. I do not go into the garden for secrets. I go for towels." "Who asked you to keep them?" Madame Darzac's eyes went to the concierge and away. "A foolish girl who played at being serious," she said at last. She was leaving. She said, "Keep these until I send for them, or until I am brave enough." She was never brave enough. She swallowed. Later, someone came to ask what I had. A man. He did not press. He only looked as if not knowing would choke him. I said nothing. I kept the box because I could not bring myself to throw it away. And when did it leave the trunk? I do not know. Too quick, and then slower. A week? 2? I do not keep accounts of dust. Who has a key to your lock? No one, she said with more force than truth, but there is always someone. In a house like this, locks are reminders, not barriers. He let that stand. On the shelf in the neighboring cell, 3 left. The stub of red wax lay where he had seen it before, a small, tired relic. He noted how the floorboards ran under both cages without respect for tin tags and padlocks. Things like rain and rumors moved where they wanted. Back in the lodge, the concierge brewed tea they did not drink. Outside, the chalk line remained a fine white thread along the edge of the tarpaulin. Maigret went and stood by it, hands in his pockets. The man from the balcony crossed the courtyard with his easy, undecorated gait. His shoes, as always, were patiently clean. "You were a cobbler once," Maigret said without preamble. The man's mouth tilted. "Not clever enough with leather," he said. "I pressed trousers in a hotel. Shoes pass in front of you all day. You learn their moods. You spoke of hands yesterday. I know shoes." He looked down at the tarpaulin and the chalk line. "If you leave it until night, someone will test it because they cannot help themselves." "Perhaps," Maigret said. "Does Wednesday mean anything to you?" "Half a week," the man said. "In the hotel, lovers left on Wednesday, cheaper than weekends. Here, the man looked toward the stair. Wednesday was when the bells tried. Some people moved then, who did not move other days." He flicked ash carefully into the damp so it darkened at once. "It is easier to be brave on the sound of a bell." Madame Girard came out carrying a small rug to shake, as if to demonstrate to the world that she occupied herself with things that could be seen. She paused when she saw them and folded the rug instead, pressing the fold with the heel of her hand as one presses a page. Her eyes touched the tarpaulin, did not linger, then rose to the balcony rail where the slippers had been. Up there now, 2 shirts hung side by side, sleeves touching like tired arms. "Madame," Maigret said, "did you ask Madame Darzac to keep your things?" Her lips moved before the words did. "I asked no one. I am not a child. If something was kept, it was done without me." The denial came tired, and something in it carried gratitude and resentment at once. "A ring," he said, as if naming a weather. She almost smiled. "I have no rings," she said. "Only scales." From the stair, the retired postman descended carefully, one hand sliding along the banister as if letters might fall from it. He stopped near them as though by coincidence. His eyes were on the patch of covered earth in a way that was not curiosity. "You should not leave earth under cloth," he said, repeating the thought as a man repeats a proverb learned in youth. "It needs air." "We have our reasons," Maigret said. "Yes," Léger replied. "Everyone does." He turned his head and looked full at Madame Girard for the first time since the night before. In that look lay a tenderness so ill at ease that it could only have been old. She did not hold it. Her gaze moved past him, toward the lilac that held last year's stems, like memories of a bloom. A small incident, then, as often happens before larger ones. A dishcloth, clean and folded, dropped from the powdered woman's balcony. It landed near the tarpaulin and slid a little, leaving a faint path through the chalk that was not quite a break, only a suggestion. She came down at once, flustered to retrieve it, fluttering apologies that did not quite rise to contrition. When she lifted the cloth, its corner wore a white bloom. She shook it once, sharply, as if it had misbehaved. "No harm," Maigret said, and meant it. People tested lines without knowing why. He went back to the lodge. On the counter lay a parish leaflet someone had shoved through the slot. Vespers, Wednesdays at 6, and a stub of pencil used to check off boxes for Easter flowers. The concierge, seeing him look, said, "It is pinned by the door at the church. People take them to write their names for lilies." "Do we have a Wednesday today?" he asked, though he knew the answer. She smiled despite herself. "Always, even when the rain thinks otherwise." It was late afternoon by then, the light flattening into that hour when kitchens begin to smell of onions and someone lays a cloth over the radio to soften the voice. Maigret sent Janvier to sit in the back pew by the pillar the sacristan had mentioned, to watch who came by the side door and who stood under the porch to listen to the bell. He himself did not move far. He sat on the bench beneath the lilac and let the day cough itself toward evening. The man from the balcony had vanished inside. The bookbinder passed once with his hands in his pockets, thumbs rubbing the blue out of habit. He did not look at the lodge. Madame Darzac crossed with a basin and stopped, without meaning to glance at the tarpaulin's edge. She did not touch it. When the bells began, they reached the courtyard with a softness the rain could not cancel, a sound like a hand pressed gently on the table to quiet talk. The boy in the lodge lifted his head from his comic book. The retired postman's lips moved as if counting without numbers. From above, the piano stopped and did not start again. Maigret rose, slowly. He had no speech to make and no drama to conjure. He stood in the doorway of the lodge and watched the faces that turned toward nothing in particular because they were listening. Somewhere, 2 floors up, a door clicked shut with care. The chalk line remained a narrow whiteness that said nothing and kept its counsel. "After Vespers," he thought, hearing the phrase as if it had been said beside him. In silence. He did not move toward the church. He did not need to. People come back to the words they once wrote, if only to prove to themselves they had meant them. In the half-hour that followed, when the rain made smaller noises and the bell fell quiet, a letter slid under the lodge door with a dry, unimportant sound. The concierge picked it up with her fingertips and looked at him. It was a Plain envelope, unsealed, cheap paper that takes ink badly. Inside, one line, no signature. It was not hers to bury. The concierge held the envelope as if it might crumble if warmed by her palm. Maigret took it, read the single line again, then turned the paper over. It had no smell beyond cheap ink and the faintest kitchen trace that seemed to cling to every object in this house. The hand was small, compressed, a little old-fashioned, the tails of the letters tucked in as if to keep them from straying. He set it beside the parish leaflet on the counter and did not ask at once who had come or gone. People talk when they feel their words can land somewhere soft. Janvier returned from the church with rain on his shoulders and the look of a man who had watched a small scene and kept it intact. The bells did their part, he said. Madame Girard stood under the porch and did not go in. She kept her hands in her sleeves. The bookbinder went in, sat near the back, and left before the last prayer. The man from the balcony came as far as the threshold and turned away when he saw a woman he knew. The retired postman made a slow circuit of the square and counted the pigeons by the fountain. Madame Darzac was not there. Maigret's eyes had gone to the leaflet. He tapped it once with a finger. "Fetch me a board and a thumbtack," he said to the concierge, "and a pencil that writes clean." She brought them with relief, as if an errand restored the order of the kitchen. He pinned the leaflet to the inside of the lodge door at eye level and wrote in his own round, patient script, "For lilies at Easter, write the names for whom you give thanks." He laid the pencil beneath it, across the counter. Then he sat on the chair by the window and became again a piece of furniture. It is remarkable, he had long thought, how quickly people accept new customs if they are presented as old. Before long, the powdered woman descended with an air of purpose, signed 2 names with a careful flourish that had more habit than grief, and went away lighter. The bookbinder came to ask for a package that had not come and, seeing the paper, wrote 3 initials so cramped they looked like stitches. The man from the balcony came to borrow matches and left 2 names without curves, the way hotel clerks write room numbers in ledgers. The retired postman, who might have been thought to resist such things, came in as if to ask the time and stood, head tilted, reading through his spectacles as if the letters themselves might leak a clue. He wrote 1 name, very small, with an R that bit its tail. Maigret let them pass. He did not compare under the lamp like a boy with stamps. He took the new note in his fingers again, saw the same R, the same meanness of space between words, as if the writer had been taught to make room on paper for other people's addresses. He placed the note in his pocket and went out into the courtyard. The chalk along the tarpaulin's edge had not been broken. A cat had stepped across near the stone and left a faint bracket of white on the damp. Above, shirts moved in a draught that did not reach the ground. The day leaned toward evening, the hour when supper noises begin to throw shadows. The man from the balcony, he had not yet given a name and did not seem to think one necessary, appeared in the doorway, hesitated, and came to stand beside the lilac as if the plant, not the policeman, had asked for his company. "You followed me last night," Maigret said mildly. The man's mouth did that small tilt again. "You keep the same pace on wet flags as on dry," he said. "It is rare. I wanted to see where you turned when you were thinking. That is all." He looked at the tarpaulin. "I do not like covers. They make a thing look trapped." "Things are often trapped," Maigret said. "Yes." He put his hands in his pockets. "You will ask me something now." "Later," Maigret said. He had already asked. He waited. The bookbinder crossed the yard with his head down, like a man avoiding weather that comes from within. His thumb rubbed at a blue stain on his index finger that would not leave. He touched the edge of the tarpaulin with the side of his shoe, a gesture so small it might have been a twitch. The chalk did not show it. He did not look up. From the lodge door, the boy watched with his comic book closed against his chest, the way children hold things when they are pretending not to care. The concierge called him by name, and he rose only when Maigret nodded. There were economies to be maintained. Inside again, the kettle offered its comfort without insisting. The lilies list had acquired 4 more names, one of them written as if through a fog. Maigret took the pencil, drew a small line on the counter, and saw how the graphite broke, soft as it does in older pencils that have been sharpened with knives. He dropped it back as if bored with it and said, "Madame Darzac." She came, brisk and tight, like a towel wrung too often. She did not approach the paper. She kept her hands tucked, not into sleeves like Madame Girard, but against her ribs, guarding something that had no shape. "What now?" she asked. "A phrase," he said, and took from his pocket the small envelope. He did not hold it out. He read the line, "It was not hers to bury." She flinched very slightly, as if the pronoun had found its mark, then lifted her chin. "People who cannot speak directly slide things under doors," she said. "If you have something to say to me, you can say it in the air." "I rarely have," he said. "It was not to you I meant to speak." He let the envelope lie open on the counter where the parish leaflet could read it. He turned to Janvier. "Take a round of the courtyard. Slowly." When Janvier had gone, he said softly, "Monsieur Léger." The retired postman had been sitting very straight on the chair beneath the coat hooks, as if the act of sitting itself were a duty. He came forward and lowered himself on the bench as a man lowers himself into memory. His hands lay on his knees, the fingers flat. A tremor ran in the left one and then learned its manners. "You wrote this," Maigret said, without surprise and without blame. Léger did not ask how he knew. He looked at the envelope the way one looks at a letter one has delivered but not read. "I wrote it," he said. "If it is wrong, you can tear it." "It is not wrong," Maigret said. "It is insufficient." Léger's eyes moved to the window and took in the lilac, the tarpaulin, the shirts above, all with the same small sadness. "I watched a long time from that balcony," he said. "A man's back goes before his eyes. I watched her in that dress and wanted to be a decent man. I failed at one of those things." He made the same half-smile he used for proverbs. "It is not important which." "You gave her the ring." "I did," he said quietly. "It was mine to give and not mine. I had a wife then who woke already angry. One tells oneself things about the heart at 50 that would embarrass a younger man. I gave the ring because I thought the gesture would make me truthful. It did not. She—" He did not look toward the stairs when he said it. "She returned it after Vespers. She brought the little box to the church. She was brave, but not in the way she wanted. She asked a neighbor to keep it because she did not trust herself to keep it from herself. She asked the wrong neighbor. Madame Darzac? She is not wrong for everything," he said, as if he had promised himself to be fair. "She believes in order. She puts even grief in piles." He looked at his hands. "I asked later to see the things, only to know they still existed. She said no. She said time does that work for us. I'm not skilled with time." "Who took the box from the trunk?" "I did not," he said, and his voice had no pleading in it. "I have keys in my head, not in my hand. I would have kept it where it lay if keeping could be done by wishing. But someone else began to move in the house, the way wood swells when it rains. Things were touched. People looked out of windows who had not looked for years. I thought, if it is to be hidden again, it should be by both of us, or by neither." He nodded at the tarpaulin. "I could not tolerate the garden." "The note you wrote 10 years ago?" Maigret said. "Forgive me. Come in silence." "Wednesday after Vespers." Léger shut his eyes. "That was hers," he said, "or it would have been if she had not been afraid of paper. She spoke those words to me in the sacristy when the bell was still shaking. I put them on a page because I was a postman and believed in paper as a way to anchor the air. I sealed it because I was ashamed of my hands." He opened his eyes. "I left it in the box, thinking it would make us brave to see it again. It did not. We did not open the box. Outside, a door shut with care 2 floors up. The piano did not begin. The light in the lodge had deepened, making the green shade throw its pool, in which the envelope and the parish leaflet lay like 2 kinds of liturgy. And now? Maigret asked. Now, Léger said. Someone has decided to finish what we failed to do. Hide or reveal. I cannot tell which. He lifted his head at last and met Maigret's eyes. I did not bury it. It was not hers to bury, and it was not mine either. If you ask me who is capable of putting a box into the ground and telling themselves it was tidiness, I will say the name you already have on your tongue. He turned his head a little, toward the cellar door, not the stairs. But there are others who like to reseal things. Maigret did not glance toward the blue handkerchief in 3 left, or the stub of red wax on the shelf, or the tiny satin thread caught in a trunk splinter. He did not need to. He stood, and the chair spoke softly under him. We will not dig tonight, he said. We will let the ground breathe. Janvier will stay at the church door a little longer. After that, he will sit under the lilac. If anyone must visit the cellar, they will ask me for the key. Léger rose with him, not relieved, not defeated. You will make it decent, he said, and in that word lay everything he could not ask. We will try, Maigret said. The evening put down its weight. In the yard, the chalk line held. In the lodge, the envelope lay open beside the list for lilies. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, someone lifted a carpet and found chalk on the hem and did not know what to make of it. The rain returned, softer, like a memory being spoken aloud for the first time in years. Evening folded itself into the courtyard with the meek persistence of the rain. The bell had long since fallen quiet. Janvier, a dark shoulder in the gloom beneath the lilac, shifted only to draw his collar up. The boy in the lodge read a page and then the same page again. The concierge's lamp threw its green circle like a harbor light. Maigret sat with his hands in his pockets and let the day finish. A house tells its story best when it thinks no one is listening. Toward 9, a door opened somewhere above with that particular care people use when they hope the sound will not belong to them. A shape came down the stair, paused on the last step, then crossed the yard, not quite at the edge of the tarpaulin, but close enough to feel the damp it held. The clogs made almost no sound on the flags. The chalk line, not a trap, but a question, showed a faint smear where the hem of a skirt had wandered against it. Bonsoir, Madame Darzac, Maigret said, the way one remarks on weather that has arrived. She started, but did not pretend. The scarf was tied hard under her chin. The dishcloth she carried had the determined neatness of an errand. Under it, when the cloth slipped, the handle of a small trowel showed, polished by some other life of soil. She stood very straight, as if her spine were answering to someone stricter than he. I came for air, she said. My rooms are close. Air can be found at any hour, he said gently. Tools less so. She looked at the trowel as if it had betrayed her. I was going to set right the earth, she said. It sits wrong. Water gathers. Janvier did not move. The chalk glowed a little in the lodge's light, a thread that had been touched but not broken. Somewhere above, a chair scraped, then a silence as complete as attention. Maigret nodded toward the bench. Sit a moment, he said, as if asking a favor. She obeyed with the stiffness of a schoolgirl who intends to be proper, even in defeat. The trowel lay across her knees like a ruler. You kept the box, he said. She drew breath to deny and let it out again. I kept what no one should keep, she said in a low voice, because I cannot throw away, because I cannot bear loose ends. They make a house untidy. She looked not at him, but at the tarpaulin's dull sheen. She put it with me one day. That girl who liked to look at herself in the window and then pretend she was ashamed of it. Keep it, she said. Only for a week. A week is a drawer, commissaire. A month is a shelf. 10 years is a trunk. And then men came later with their soft voices. The retired post. Monsieur Léger. He wanted to see that the thing still existed. He has the politeness of someone who has lied kindly most of his life. I said no. Her mouth tried on a smile and found it did not fit. And the bookbinder, he is always pressing things flat that were meant to breathe. He saw the seal broken. She had broken it, the brave mouse, and he offered wax. Let it look whole, he said, for decency. He resealed it like a spine. You asked him to? I did not ask, she said. He offers order as other men offer cigarettes. And when did you decide to bury it? She looked at the lilac, at last year's dead heads that had not been cut and so made this year's bloom late. When she began to stand at the window at vespers again, she said, hands in sleeves like a penitent, looking toward the church as if the bell could ring time backward. It is dangerous in a house when people begin to open old drawers. Letters start to travel without stamps. Tears find their corners again. I thought, if it is not in the trunk and not on a shelf and not in her hands, then where? The ground is honest? It does not whisper. You buried it. Yes. She folded the dishcloth on her lap in a square and pressed the edge with her thumb. It was a Sunday because I do not wash sheets on Sundays. I came down when the mass started and no one looked from the windows. I wore the clogs and took the oilcloth from my kitchen drawer because the ground is greedy. I do not smoke, commissaire. The cork tip you found belongs to men who stand and watch and do not help. The paper only but, he said, almost idly. She lifted one shoulder. He bites his cigarettes, she said, the blue-handed one. He stood under the arch and chewed his smoke while I worked. He said nothing. When I passed him, he held out his handkerchief like a flag and asked if I wanted wax. It was done. The twine was new. I bought oranges, she said, almost with pride. Crates still had string on them. It is good string. It does not fray. Janvier had come nearer without seeming to. The lodge's window gave a small sigh as the concierge leaned against its frame to hear. Above, a shadow watched at the curve of a curtain and withdrew when the shadow realized it had been seen. Why now? Maigret asked. 10 years of keeping is a habit. Why break it? The bell, she said simply. It rang and would not stop ringing in this house, in the walls, in the pipes. I thought if the box was in the earth, the sound would go into the ground and not into her. It is foolish to say aloud. Tidiness can be cruelty. She looked at her hands. Someone must write that on a leaflet and pin it for me to read. He said nothing. The rain made a sound on the tarpaulin like breath under a blanket. In the corner of the yard, the cat that had left white on its paws washed them with care, as if shame were soluble. You wrote a note, he said after a moment. Not tonight. 10 years ago you wrote nothing, but tonight you wrote under my door. It was not hers to bury. For whom? She flushed, and the powder could not keep up. For the little teacher, she said, and the words were more tender than her mouth understood how to make them. She will take blame as if it were laundry. She lifted her chin. And for the retired postman. He takes too much of other people's letters into his own heart. Do you regret burying it? I regret everything that is not reversible, she said. The ground is patient, commissaire. People are not. We make our tidy plans and then lie awake. From the stair, a tread that did not try to hide itself. The bookbinder came down with his hands in his pockets, the blue worn into the cloth now as much as into the skin. He stopped when he saw them and considered going back. Then, perhaps from tiredness, he did not. You resealed it, Maigret said to him, not as an accusation. He looked at Madame Darzac as a craftsman looks at a client who has brought a torn book and asked for magic. Wax is wax, he said. It closes what is open. It does not make promises. He touched the fence with 2 fingers, leaving a faint blue on the wood that rain would erase by morning. She asked me nothing. I saw it and could not leave it untidy. The letter wanted the appearance of a thing that had not been read. It seems some people prefer that kind of lie. Did you help Berry? No, he said, and truth sat well on the word. I watched, and later I smoked and bit the end because my mouth wanted occupation. Why watch? Because paper that goes into the ground offends me, he said, and it almost sounded like humor, except that his mouth was not made for humor. I went to the church today to ask forgiveness for my trade. They talk about sins of pride and envy and not about glue. Madame Darzac drew the dishcloth tighter around the trowel as if it could be chilled. I did wrong, she said, very evenly. But it was my wrong to do. I've made this house decent through 3 owners and a war. I can tell when indecency is in the air, though the windows be shut. I do not like men bringing their rings into my stairwells when their wives bake cakes. I do not like girls who stand under bells and pretend that sound is absolution, so I put the noise under the earth. If you wish to arrest me for that, then you will have to write a law. There is no law, Maigret said, and the tiredness in his voice belonged to Paris rather than to him. Only people. He stood. The bench moved behind his knees like an old dog. He looked from the woman to the bookbinder to the shadow behind the curtain above that had been a face and was now only the idea of watching. We will not unbury anything tonight, he said. We have all we need to know for the night. He walked them back through the passage without haste, as if escorting them to their own rooms. In the lodge, the green lamp still made its pool. The parish leaflet was pin-pricked where eager names had pressed too hard. The envelope with the single line lay under a saucer to keep it from moving in any draught. He left it there. On the way out, he paused beneath the balcony where, in the photograph, a blurred man had leaned 10 years ago. Now a different man came to the rail, the one with the patient shoes, the man who knew when others boiled water. He looked down without embarrassment. You do not sleep early either, he said. No, Maigret said. Tell me your name. The man thought a moment as if it mattered less than the state of his soles. Vidal, he said. I press clothes. He lifted his wrist a little, showing chalk along the stitching where a hem had brushed the tarpaulin's edge when he had leaned earlier. He did not brush it away. Some creases, he said, are meant to stay. Maigret nodded. He crossed the yard, careful of the chalk as if it had something to teach him, and let himself out into the street where the rain had turned fine again, the kind that says the night will not end in anger. The case had shifted the smallest degree, as weather does. It was enough. In the morning, when the kettle began to tick in the concierge's lodge and the cat reappeared with clean paws, he would bring them all into one room and let the silence arrange the furniture. The truth was almost at the surface, like a root that has felt the spade and knows it cannot remain where it is. By morning, the courtyard had a rinsed look, the kind Paris wears when the rain has done its work, but not left the city proud of it. The cat came trotting from the passage with paws so clean it seemed to have negotiated with the night. In the lodge, the kettle clicked with the same patient rhythm as the green-shaded lamp's faint hum. The parish leaflet sat where he had left it, thumbtacked to the inside of the door. The pencil lay across the counter like a small bridge. Names had gathered on the page in different hands, as if griefs had taken numbers and cued politely. Maigret arrived without haste. He warmed his fingers around the cup the concierge pressed into them and stood a moment at the window, looking at the tarpaulin's dull back and the chalk line that still lay unbroken, a sentence not yet tampered with. He asked, in the voice one uses for menus, that they all come down. The request went up the stairs, floor by floor, in the boy's quick feet and the concierge's steadier breath. They came. Madame Darzac first, scarf tied but not so tightly as last night, her mouth set into a shape that said she intended to behave as if behavior could mend things. The bookbinder followed, his hands scrubbed to a new pail that made the blue stand out sharper, as if he had tried to clean more than skin. The retired postman came carefully, one palm on the banister, his face composed but not blank. Madame Girard last, with her hair properly pinned and her eyes without powder, as if she had decided the day did not require disguise. Vidal appeared in the doorway and did not enter, as if the threshold were his habit. They took places without instruction. Chairs were moved by the small inches of people not wanting chairs to speak for them. Janvier closed the lodge door softly, and the room contracted to include only breath and the soft sound of porcelain settling on saucers. Lognon arrived late and made a note of it to save others the trouble. Maigret did not sit behind the counter. He took the place by the window, the pipe unlit in his fingers. He began, as he always did when rooms were full of words that did not know their order, by saying very little. "You kept the box in your trunk, Madame Darzac," he said at last, his tone matter-of-fact. "You buried it on a Sunday during Mass. You used oilcloth and new twine. You did not smoke. Someone watched you. Someone resealed the letter long before that so that it would look unbroken." The woman's chin lifted a degree and then came down. "Yes," she said. The word found its mark and stopped there. "The wax," he went on, turning his gaze a fraction, "came from the hand of a man who hopes glue can stand in for mercy." The bookbinder's mouth tilted as if to object, then did not. "Yes," he said. "Appearance is a weak cloth. I sew with it anyway." A small current ran through the room and ended in the quiet of the green shade. Maigret reached into his pocket and took out the plain envelope that had arrived the previous evening. He placed it on the counter, open so that the small compressed hand could be seen and the one line read again without being spoken. No one touched it. "There is a ring," he said. "A ring with the letter A, thinned by years of wear. There is a letter that asks for forgiveness without saying for what, and asks for silence without saying from whom. There is a photograph taken in this garden 10 years ago of a woman by the lilac and a man on the balcony blurred, because photographs always keep what you do not ask them to keep." The retired postman's hands came together on his knees. He looked at the photograph where it lay in the cigar box, then lifted his eyes to the balcony that now held only the rail and the memory of last night's chalk on the stitching of a sleeve. "I am the man," he said quietly. "Blurred suits me." "Why the ring?" Lognon asked, his pencil eager to be right at least about a detail. "Because I thought myself decent and tried to give decency a token," Léger said. "It is foolish to put a virtue on a finger and call it settled. I asked forgiveness in a sacristy because there was a man there whose job it was to take such requests and not make faces. She," he looked neither up nor down when he said it, "came after Vespers and put the ring in the box and asked a neighbor to keep it for a week. She returned it because she was braver than I was, and because she was the one who paid the bill for all our politeness." Madame Girard's hands had been folded on her lap, one thumb pressed into the other. She looked at the photograph as if the paper might have learned to breathe in the night. When she spoke, it was in the tone of someone resigned to diction. "My name is Adrian," she said. Her mouth made a small, tired joke without humor. "A very useful letter, eh? It fits many things. The sacristan wrote A. Girard because I was too vain to give more than an initial and too afraid to give none. I wore the dress because I had made it mine with my scissors. I stood for the photograph because he asked. I let myself be given a ring when he should have saved it for the woman who baked his cakes and ironed his shirts. I gave it back because I could not bear to wear something stolen, even if the theft was of hope and not of gold." Her voice faltered and steadied. "I asked Madame Darzac to keep the box because she knows how to keep things even when keeping becomes a vice." Silence settled, not heavy, only exact. The concierge picked up the kettle and set it down again without pouring. Vidal shifted in the doorway and looked at his shoes as if they could step in for him. Maigret did not declare a crime. He let the room hold its own absent verdicts. 10 years, he said. 10 years have made a sound in this house like a bell that sometimes rings without being pulled. It rang again this week. Did something change? They looked at one another, and then away, a choreography as old as stairwells. The bookbinder moved first. "She returned," he said. "Not Madame Adrienne. The wife. She came back to the building yesterday to see a cousin on the 3rd floor. The cousin was out. She stood under the balcony and counted the lilacs without counting them. Then she went away." He rubbed the blue from one finger as if it might give up its dye. There was wax in the air again. It makes people tidy their faces. Léger's jaw had settled into that stubbornness men acquire when they have spent years choosing the route of the post, no matter the weather. He did not nod. He did not glance toward the stair. He said only, "She knows enough to know. Not everything, but enough." Madame Darzac's mouth tightened into its purse of certainty. "Then it was right to bury," she said. "If someone must be spared, spare the one who did the baking." Adrienne Girard shook her head very slightly. "We are always sparing the ones with aprons," she said, "and they are always the last to be spared." She lifted her eyes to Maigret's and held them, not defiance, not appeal, only a request for ordinary conduct. "You will not make a spectacle?" "No," he said. He took the cigar box from the counter and shut the lid without hurry. The pressed lilac and the ribbon and the letter and the ring went into a brown paper bag the concierge fetched from under the sink, the kind used for bread when bread was still wrapped in paper. He folded the top once, then again, and pressed the crease with his thumb. "These things do not belong to the earth," he said. "They will not go back there. They will be sent to the person who can decide what to do with them." He looked at Léger. "You will write her. Not an explanation. A small letter, like a man who knows the weight of envelopes. If she wishes the past to be put where she can put it, she will tell us. If not, it will remain in my drawer where curiosity goes to quiet." Léger's eyes shone wet in a way that had nothing to do with tears. "I can write one more letter," he said. "It will be the last of that route." Adrienne's breath left her in a long, neat sigh, like a note finally played after being held in the hand too long. "Thank you," she said, to no one and to everyone. Longnon made a sound that might have been disapproval and might have been indigestion. "And the hole?" he asked. "We keep a hole under oilcloth for sentiment now." Maigret looked at the tarpaulin, at the chalk still bright along its edge. "We put the earth back," he said. "It is better at forgetting than we are." He turned to the boy. "Fetch me the spade." They went out together, the boy proud of the tool as of a flag. The tarpaulin lifted with a sucking impatience, the soil beneath dark and cold and honest. Maigret knelt and spread the mound with the flat of the spade, not burying anything now, but smoothing, as one smooths the counter after bread has been sliced. The smell of damp rose up, not accusing. The lilac shook itself like a dog come indoors. He did not hurry. When he finished, he handed the spade to the boy and stood with a heaviness that came more from sympathy than from knees. He looked up. On the balcony, Vidal had a shirt in his hands and shook it once so that its arms rose and fell. He met Maigret's eyes and made a small gesture with his wrist, a presser's acknowledgement that a crease had been set where it ought to be. Back in the lodge, the brown paper bag sat on the counter like any parcel, humble and present. The parish leaflet fluttered a little in a draught that came from under the door. People began to find reasons to go back to their rooms. Chairs were returned to approximate places. The concierge washed 2 cups that had not been used and set them to dry as if they had. Maigret lingered. He thought of Madame at home with the knitting in her lap and a stew she had decided would not mind being reheated. He thought of the letter that would be written, addressed in a hand that had not forgotten roots, even if it had forgotten speed, stamped and carried across whatever distance was left between certain pasts and certain kitchens. He did not imagine the reply. He knew better than to write endings in advance. Outside, the rain paused, then reconsidered and went on. In the garden, nothing showed of what had been lifted out and looked at and spoken over. He took up his hat. "Janvier," he said. You'll see it through. And to the room, because rooms like to be spoken to. It will be quiet now. He stepped into the passage, where boiled cabbage had been replaced by onions and a hint of coffee. The corridor smelled like a life a person could go back to. He did not look back until he reached the street. Then he did. Once. The green shade made its small island of light. The cat sat in it, paws tucked away, as if to keep them clean. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time Maigret left Montparnasse for the last time in this affair. He did not hurry, walking with the pipe unlit in his hand, listening to the soft hiss of tires on wet streets and the occasional clatter of a tram. It was late enough that shutters were drawn, but in the cafes a few men lingered with their drinks, shoulders bent inward, speaking in voices that did not want to be overheard. Paris at night, carrying its small burdens, each as private as the box had once been. The letter went out the following day, in Léger's careful script. It did not attempt explanations, nor did it confess. It was simply an envelope with a few lines. There are things you should decide for yourself. They are safe. If you wish them returned, they will be sent. If not, they will be left to rest in silence. Inside was no photograph, no ring, no pressed lilac. Only the promise that choice still belonged to her. Maigret had insisted on that. Some matters, he thought, are solved not by courts or by neighbors' whispers, but by the simple fact of giving someone back the right to choose. Days passed. The courtyard grew quieter, as Madame Darzac had wished, though not by burial this time, but by a kind of relief. The piano scales resumed, steady now, less faltering. Adrienne walked to the church and back without glancing at the lilacs. Vidal pressed shirts at the hotel and returned each night with shoes still patient and clean. The bookbinder went down to his cellar with his blue hands, but no longer lingered by shelves that were not his. Even the concierge seemed satisfied, sweeping her tiles with more rhythm than resentment. The boy whistled again when he read his comic books. And then, one morning, a parcel arrived at the Quai des Orfèvres. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, the twine knotted carefully but without fuss. Inside, the ring and the ribbon and the pressed lilac returned with no note. Only the letter remained, folded once more, the seal finally broken for good. Whoever had received Léger's words had made a choice, not to reclaim, not to bury again, but to release. Maigret held the ring in his hand for a moment, its thin band warm from his skin. He could imagine Adrienne's finger, Léger's guilty gift, Madame Darzac's trunk, the years of silence around it. Objects, he thought, are only heavy when people refuse to carry their own share of memory. He placed the ring and the rest in a drawer in his office, not locked but closed, where old matters slept. It was not evidence anymore, nor secret, only life, folded away. That evening he sat with Madame at the dinner table, steam rising from the stew. She listened as he told her how it had ended, not in an arrest, not in scandal, but in quietness. She smiled in her small, understanding way and poured him a glass of wine. "It is better so," she said. "People do not need punishment for being human." Afterward, he stepped onto the balcony with his pipe. The air was cool, the street lamps glowing faintly on the damp pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang vespers. He thought of Adrienne at her piano, of Léger at his window, of Madame Darzac smoothing her dishcloths, of Vidal walking home with the measured tread of a man who pressed other people's creases, but carried none of his own. Ordinary lives, with ordinary sins, which time had stretched and folded until they seemed larger than they were. He struck a match, lit the pipe at last, and let the smoke curl upward. The case of the box buried in the garden had ended, not with revelations shouted or with justice weighed on scales of law, but with silence. The silence that tells more than words, the silence of people who have decided to go on. Maigret drew on his pipe and watched the street below. The city breathed, carrying secrets in its cellars and courtyards, in its drawers and trunks, each waiting to be unearthed in its own time. But for tonight, Paris was, simply itself, damp and weary and endlessly alive. And that, he thought, was enough.